Hello and welcome to your Broken Galaxy. I am Broken, and today I am answering the question, what if Qui-Gon defeated Darth Maul? Now, this video was suggested to me by a patron. I am currently committed to doing one video a month as suggested by a $5 a month patron or higher. So I choose from all of the people who are donating to me $5 a month or higher and pick one of their videos. And so far there's only 2 people that are doing that, and one of them has never suggested a video. So Simon Kendrick, this video is for you. I hope you like it. Qui-Gon appears before the Jedi and he says, "I'm going to train the boy." And the council is like, "Dude, what about Obi-Wan?" And Qui-Gon says, "What about Obi-Wan?" And Obi-Wan is like, "I'll tell you about Obi-Wan. I'm ready for the trials." And they are a little bit flustered by their disagreement. Anyway, Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan, and Anakin fly to Naboo, and out comes Darth Maul. He's looking all fierce and Sithly, and the music is blasting away as it goes. So Qui-Gon says, "We'll handle this." And then Darth Maul ignites his lightsaber. Then the other side of his lightsaber, and Qui-Gon steps up and feints low, but then stabs him right in the face. They end up winning their little battle there, and everyone is happy. So they fly back to Coruscant, and Qui-Gon says, "I'll take Anakin as my Padawan now." And May says, No, you already have a Padawan." And Yoda says, "Disagree with your decision to train the boy, but the Jedi Council approves of your training him once your apprentice Obi-Wan has passed the trials of knighthood." And Qui-Gon says, "Yoda, I accept this. I believe that my Padawan is ready to start the trials. I will commence Anakin's training only after that has happened." And Palpatine, he is really happy with Anakin's Force ability. Padme was talking about the pod race and everything, and when he was around, Anakin was like, "Oh dang, this guy has got some serious strength with the Force. So I can just sense it in his aura coming off of him." So Palps starts putting his plans together. Meanwhile, Dooku is like, "I'm so glad that Qui-Gon is alive, but the Jedi are just the absolute worst. So I'm still going to join Palpatine in order to rid the galaxy of corruption." And he does. He goes off and joins the supervillain in order to save the galaxy. Don't really understand Dooku on that one, but that's what he does. So Obi-Wan ends up being told by Qui-Gon that he is ready for the test. So he's all happy and cocky about it, and he walks into the Jedi classroom, and Yaddle says, "Padawan Kenobi." And Kenobi says, "Actually, it's pronounced Obi-Wan." And Yaddle says, "Don't sass me, Padawan. The first portion of your Jedi trials is the written test." And Obi-Wan says, "I'm sorry, what?" And Yaddle says, "You will have 5 hours to complete a 250 question multiple choice test. Do your best." So Obi-Wan, he is freaking the heck out. Qui-Gon never mentioned a written test. They were just flying around on adventures all over the place. So he bombs the thing. He gets a 54%. And he goes back to Qui-Gon and Jar Jar and says, "Master, why didn't you prepare me for the written test?" And Qui-Gon says, "I shouldn't have needed to. I gave you an hour every morning to review the Jedi texts." And Obi-Wan says, "I never did that. I always just took a nap." So Qui-Gon is frustrated and says, "What score did you get?" And Obi-Wan says, I got a 54. And Qui-Gon says, 54? Obi-Wan, the first half of the test was repeat questions from your test to become a Padawan. Are you telling me you were only able to answer an additional 4% of the questions?" And Obi-Wan says, "No, Master, I actually forgot a lot of those. I just guessed on a whole bunch of them, and I must have got some of them right." So Qui-Gon looks over at Jar Jar, who just kind of shrugs and says, "All right, let's get to studying." So Qui-Gon goes to Anakin and is like, "Look, little man, I'm not going to be able to train you yet. I still have some work to do with Obi-Wan. But as soon as he passes his knighthood trials, you'll be my Padawan." And Anakin asks, "Does that mean I have to keep hanging around all of these 4-year-olds? And Qui-Gon says, "They aren't all 4. Grogu's 19. So, for the next 2 years, Qui-Gon works with Obi-Wan on the philosophies of the Force and everything. He takes the written test, and Obi-Wan gets a 78, and he is feeling pretty amazing. And Qui-Gon says, "Obi-Wan, that is just a remarkable improvement. But you actually need an 80 to pass, so we have to keep working, and you can try it again in 6 months." Finally, 6 months later, Obi-Wan passes the written test, and he and Qui-Gon and Jar Jar all go out for ice cream. which means it is now time for him to move on to the trials. The written test was basically just a formality, but now Obi-Wan has 5 Jedi trials, and the first trial that he has to face is the trial of skill. He's got to fight a bunch of remotes shooting little shock blasts at him without getting distracted. And as soon as he steps up, Mace says, "Oh, hey, Qui-Gon, after this is over, I need you to go to Mandalore to talk to Satine Kryze about a trade dispute." And Qui-Gon is like, "Jar Jar, Obi-Wan, and I can handle it." So Obi-Wan is totally flustered. He doesn't even last a minute. And then they fly to Mandalore for a couple months to help out Satine. Meanwhile, Anakin is still in the youngling class. He's like 12 now, and the other kids are all like 6, 7 years old. Palpatine and Dooku have started their clone army trying to get things going without too much worry. So, 3 months later, Obi-Wan comes back for his second round at the trial of skill, but he just can't handle it. All he is thinking about is Satine. He just loses about 20 seconds before the 5-minute drill is up, and now he has a confidence problem. So he keeps trying once a month, but he has got himself so worked up, and he doesn't have the confidence going in, and he keeps bombing it. Finally, he gets a full week of nothing to do but practice the drill, because honestly, Qui-Gon is just really upset that he hasn't been able to start training Anakin yet. So he's like, "Obi-Wan, do nothing else except practice for this drill." And he is doing brilliantly. Finally, with 5 seconds left on his most recent attempt at the test, Jar Jar screams from the viewing balcony, "Satine will be so proud!" And Obi-Wan looks at him in shock and takes a blaster bolt right in the face. He is knocked out, has to take medical leave. Finally, after a year and a half of trying, he passes the test of skill. Palpatine has been trying to get Anakin to come over so he can talk to him, but the Jedi are like, "We're sorry, but until he's a Padawan, he will not be allowed to leave the temple." So Palps is all flustered. Qui-Gon is also starting to doubt his ability as a trainer of Jedi. His first Padawan left the Jedi Order, and now Obi-Wan is just utterly bombing the trials. Speaking of which, his next trial is the Trial of Courage. And let me tell you, at this point, having failed so much, Obi-Wan's courage has dropped incredibly. To fulfill this, Obi-Wan has to track down a group of pirates that have been harassing an asteroid mining colony. He went there, did some investigative work, and after a month of tracking them down, ended up getting kidnapped by the pirates in his sleep. He was sold back to the Jedi for a ransom, and the pirates left the area. After Obi-Wan gets back, Qui-Gon goes up to Yoda and says, "Master, I think that Obi-Wan isn't fit to be a knight. I believe he should be put into the agricultural corps of the Jedi Order, and I should begin training Anakin." And Yoda is like, "Unfortunate Padawan Kenobi's utter failure is, but unless the trials of knighthood he passes, train young Skywalker, you will not." So, after a year of dangerous missions which end with Obi-Wan getting captured, knocked out, or otherwise made a fool of by people he is trying to track down, he finally gets lucky when an assassin he is chasing slips on a fruit peel and bangs his head on the ground, knocking himself out. Anakin, now 14 years old, is just super frustrated that he has to spend every day with 8 and 9-year-olds, and he is not allowed to use a real lightsaber, but instead just a training saber. So, Obi-Wan, after finally passing the Trial of Courage, is set to take the Trial of Flesh, where he has to overcome significant physical pain. Though unfortunately, when Bail Organa found out about this Trial of the Flesh just a year earlier, he put forward legislation that religious orders couldn't require their initiates to be harmed in a ceremony. In order to actually go through the Trial of Pain, he must genuinely suffer some great harm. So, he keeps going out on missions with Obi-Wan and Jar Jar. Unfortunately, though, the majority of the missions end with him just coming back fine after 2 years of just having generally successful and incident-free missions. Jar Jar is talking to Obi-Wan one day and accidentally runs over his leg with a cargo hauler, utterly shattering every bone below his knee. Obi-Wan instantly passes out because of the pain. When he wakes up, he's given the option to undergo incredibly long surgeries and back to treatments over the course of months to have his leg repaired, or to have it amputated and give him a mechanical leg. he takes the brave choice to have his real leg saved and spend the next 9 months recovering. So by this time, Palpatine is getting worried. Anakin's already 17, and he is like the cornerstone of Palpatine's plan, but he has learned basically nothing. Qui-Gon feels like an absolute failure through all of this and has really began doubting that he has anything to offer as a teacher. So he asks Plo Koon if he could train Anakin instead. But Plo's like, nope, Yoda said you have to do it after Obi-Wan becomes a knight. And Obi-Wan begins his next trial. He is now 28 years old himself. The trial of spirit. So Qui-Gon, Jar Jar, and Obi-Wan fly to some frozen planet, and Obi-Wan goes into a cave to meditate. And instead of being confronted by a Darth Vader-style version of himself, like Luke was on Dagobah, Obi-Wan is confronted with a little version of himself that just whines and complains like a kid all of the time. He gets super frustrated and just backhands the Force Vision version of himself across the face. Then goes out, sees Qui-Gon and Jar Jar, and says, "Oh, hey guys, I won." And Qui-Gon says, "How?" And Obi-Wan says, "I slapped that little twerp." And Qui-Gon just face palms, and then his head sinks in depression. And he says, "That's not the point. You're supposed to deal with your inner dark impulses." And Obi-Wan has to wait again a few months. Later, he gets another chance, but this time the darkness inside of him is an overweight guy that ended up getting married to Satine, but won't spend time with his wife or kids. And Obi-Wan stabs him. Finally, after 6 versions of Obi-Wan fighting his inner darkness, Qui-Gon says, "Obi-Wan, you can't just stab your inner darkness with a lightsaber. You have to grow up like a man and deal with it." So now that Obi-Wan has been trying this for a few years, he finds himself in a secluded place meditating, and a version of himself walks up wearing skinny jeans, wide-brimmed glasses, with blue-tipped hair, a nose ring, and a neck tattoo, and says, "You Jedi are so privileged." And Obi-Wan immediately grabs his lightsaber to strike down this evil. But he ends up putting it back on his belt and says, "You're a figment of my imagination, the worst of me. I reject your evil and release you." And finally, he walks up to Qui-Gon and says, "I did it, Master. I passed the test." And Qui-Gon says, "Finally." And Jar Jar just gives Obi-Wan a big thumbs up. So now, Dooku and Palpatine have been kind of riling up the separatist sentiment for a while here, but Palpatine is super hesitant to get the war started because Anakin has yet to even begin his Jedi training. He's now 21 years old and has been just hanging around with essentially junior hires because of the Jedi Council's absolute refusal to budge on the demand that they made Obi-Wan become a knight before Anakin could be trained. And he is like totally wasting his potential. Not only is he just spending time with the little kids in like the Force basic sessions, but as a Jedi, he's not been able to go to normal school and get like life skills that would help him get a job. In the last 13 years of his life, which is, mind you, longer than the years before he was a Jedi, he has totally forgotten everything he learned about robotics and pod racing construction even. Meanwhile, Shmi has passed away at the hands of the Tuskens, and Padme got married to Rush Clovis, which Anakin found out about because it was a massive news story, and he just cried like a baby. All the junior high age kids were like, "What's wrong, Annie?" And he was like, "Shut up, you stupid kids, you wouldn't understand." So, anyway, Obi-Wan only has one test left to go, the trial of insight. So Obi-Wan starts working at the local police precinct in order to use his insight to look into the hearts of criminals so that they would be able to discern the truth. But he was absolutely horrible at this too. After 3 years, Obi-Wan has accidentally violated dozens of criminals' rights, which has led them to have charges dropped against them and getting cases dismissed. Jar Jar would try to console him after every horribly botched attempt. Qui-Gon, however, had become increasingly withdrawn from Obi-Wan and increasingly disappointed, like the kind of parent that wants their child to grow up to become a doctor, but instead they became a YouTuber. But after the 5th lawsuit filed against Obi-Wan for someone in the criminal proceedings, from the cases he was involved in, he decides that he is going to go to Master Yoda and tell him that he's going to leave the Jedi Order. So one night, after Qui-Gon has locked himself in his room at the Jedi Temple, Obi-Wan, a now 35-year-old man, goes to see Yoda and says, "Master, I believe that I am not fit to be a Jedi Knight." And Yoda says, "About time it was that you had that insight." And Obi-Wan says, "Huh? Did you just say I had insight?" And Yoda's eyes open wide in shock as he realizes what has happened. And he says, No, wait, you must, Obi-Wan." And Obi-Wan goes running through the halls of the temple screaming, "Master Yoda says I have insight." And Yoda, defeated in spirit, hangs his head and says, "Very well." So, the next morning, Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan, and Anakin are all summoned to the Jedi Temple, and Yoda says, "Passed these trials, Obi-Wan has." And Qui-Gon says, "How in the world did this screw-up finally pass the trials?" And Yoda says, "He had the insight to see that he's not good enough to be a Jedi Knight." And Anakin, who is now 25 years old himself, says, "Does this mean I'm able to finally start my training?" And Mace says, "Wait just a gosh darn minute, Master Yoda. Are you saying that Kenobi over here is being promoted to Jedi Knight because he correctly identified that he wasn't worthy of being a Jedi Knight?" And Yoda says, "In mysterious ways does the Force work." So Mace looks at Anakin and says, "All right, Skywalker, you can begin your training." And Anakin says, "Yippee!" And then Qui-Gon just walks away. The last 16 years of making him wait had made him a very jaded individual. And as he gets to the door, he kind of looks at Anakin with just exhaustion on his face and shrugs and says, "Come on, Anakin." So Palpatine, who has been begging the Jedi Order to let him see Anakin for years, is finally told that he can see him because he is beginning his training as a Padawan. And Dooku is rather fed up with Palpatine at this point. The oldest of the clones is now 32 with their advanced aging things. The Kaminoans are getting super upset because they haven't been paid since the initial contract, which was only going to be for 10 years, and keeping the army fed while they are waiting for the war is costing trillions of credit a year that they're just going into debt for. So Qui-Gon and Anakin end up going to Palpatine's office, and Palps is Anakin, so good to see you. I've been wanting to congratulate you on your acceptance as a Jedi Padawan." And Anakin says, "I'm sorry, have we met?" And Palpatine says, "Yes, you saved my homeworld of Naboo." And Anakin says, "Yeah, I read a little about current events, so I knew you were from Padme's world." And Sheev says, "Padme Clovis, a wonderful woman." And Anakin's eyes start to water, but he ends up choking back the tears. And Palpatine says, "During the celebration, I told you that I would watch your career with great interest." And Anakin says, "It has been literally 16 years. I have done nothing except sit in the Jedi Temple's daycare all of that time. And now that I'm finally a Padawan, the first move in my career, you wanted to congratulate me." And Palpatine says, "Yes, that's right." And Anakin says, "You are a man of your word, Chancellor Palpatine. Your kindness to me is far greater than anything the Jedi have ever shown me." And Qui-Gon says, "Anakin, we've been over this. I tried so long. Obi-Wan just couldn't pass the trials." And Palpatine says, "Anakin, would you like to leave the Jedi Order and become my apprentice?" And Anakin looks over at Qui-Gon and then looks back at Sheev and says, "I guess." So Qui-Gon, defeated in body, mind, and spirit, says, "Whatever. Let's go, Jar Jar." And the two of them leave. The next day, Palpatine orders Dooku to start the war, and he does. But the day after that, Palpatine is voted out of office for having spent just years beyond the customary reign as Chancellor, and the people, believing he is incapable of performing the war at his advanced age, vote someone else into the chancellorship. As Palpatine and Anakin are fleeing to Dooku so Palpatine can take over the Separatist army, Count Dooku ends up passing away from old age because the dude is 95 years old now, and the Separatist Council pretty much immediately collapses into infighting. while Palpatine is still in transit. After like a week of training Anakin, Palpatine realizes that he absolutely does not want to teach the basics of the Force to this guy, and that he really just wanted someone who's already trained in the Force. He doesn't have the time to go over rock levitation 101, and so he ends up dropping Anakin off at Tatooine, right back where he started, with nothing and no one. Palpatine retires to Naboo, where he and his immense wealth are able to live out in miserable luxury. Qui-Gon sulks for the rest of his life. Obi-Wan ends up getting an apprentice of his own, and immediately that apprentice passes away due to the neglect and incompetence on Obi-Wan's part, and the galaxy lives happily ever after. Well, that is my video for today. I hope you liked it. I did rush to get it out because YouTube didn't let me post a review video that I did of the arena scene from Attack of the Clones. They said there was copyright infringement. And honestly, I don't want to fight with YouTube. If it's not going to let me post it, I'm just going to say, okay, and I'm going to go back to making what-ifs and using my old style of stills and pictures instead of videos. If you have a recommendation for me on a video, I would look forward to seeing what it is. Thank you, Simon Kendrick, for today's recommendation. If you'd like to support the channel, links to Patreon in the description below. You can become a YouTube channel member. You could just share this video. Honestly, if you guys just share my videos around with your friends, post them in like forums that you're in or whatever, that would make me so happy. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and all that garbage.